I am super excited to be here. It's been a great couple days, a third great day here at the first annual Enterprise Business Agility Summit, or as it is informally known, Sallypalooza. I'm Evan Campbell. I think the introduction was sufficient, but today I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of doing a zoom from closer to further out, from portfolio, budgets and funding, and then what does the new finance function look like in terms of how it organizes. Now, I'm not a finance guy. I have a business degree. I'm not a finance guy. I just play one on TV sometimes. So go easy on me, but I hope that you find some of this interesting. At SolutionsIQ, we developed a business agility capability model a couple of years ago, around the same time that Sally was developing her model, and around the same time that Evan Airborne was developing his domains of business agility. And they all integrate beautifully, which speaks to the validation of the experiences that we were having at the time. And I'll introduce ours really quickly. The particular area of this model, and so I think you can view this as a zoom out from kind of Sally's model of the pillars. They're very compatible. The area that we're going to be talking about primarily here relates to the organizational adaptability area. Organizational adaptability is a great test, a great goal of business agility. You need to be an adaptable organism to compete in the ecosystem that your business, with evolving markets and VUCA, et cetera, and being able to adapt your funding models is crucial to that. So that's where this fits. Adaptive portfolio management is critical to business agility in order to adapt to these emerging business demands. So in a lot of operational support functions, when we're doing Agile outside of IT, when we're doing Agile with HR or finance or marketing or sales, we find that there's sort of a pattern of two phases. We start the conversation with them kind of saying, what are the changes to policies, procedures affecting the rest of the company that we're going to ask you to make? HR, hey, we want team-based incentives and performance management. We want to redefine roles and accountabilities. That's phase one. The example with finance would be we need to adjust our software labor capitalization policies. And then the insidious process goes to phase two, where having inoculated them with a little taste of agility, where they think, well, I'm helping IT, but this really isn't going to affect me. Eventually, they realize that they themselves want to become an Agile organization, and that's phase two. So what does Agile HR or finance look like? So I'll talk about both of these a little bit. So in portfolio, you know, the real question is, are we doing the right work at the right time? Are we aligned on objectives? Are we breaking work down to a granular enough level to get the maximum value out of what we're doing? Historically, in old portfolio models, we certainly aren't doing any of that. Projects actually really aggravate value delivery to a significant degree. The goals of Agile portfolio management primarily increase value realized for the enterprise through balancing capacity and demand and driving out excess WIP. We were talking over the last couple of days, just comparing notes. I said that I've never worked with a corporate IT shop that didn't have at least 150% of the WIP that it could efficiently process. Jason has said he'd find it amazing if he'd see one under 200%. So I'm sure all of you know what we're talking about here. So the first step is to separate capacity and demand, stabilize the capacity, be able to measure the actual capacity of the organization to deliver value, and then ruthlessly prioritize in a pull-based model the demand coming into those delivery functions. We also want to increase business leader accountability and control of the investment streams that they're putting into technology assets. And then obviously we want to be able to learn and adjust and adapt and change our minds and respond to changes in the marketplace very, very rapidly. So that traditional portfolio management doesn't do any of those things very well. So a lot of changes there. Our portfolio management model has 5 key principles. I'm going to touch on a couple of these without draining it. probably the most important one, and this goes straight to trying to drive down excess WIP, is near-term capacity in your delivery organization is fixed. Let's disabuse everybody in the organization that we can hire, outsource, staff up, subcontract. What near term, we can't get effective capacity above what we have today. So let's just start with the premise that we've got to get WIP down to what we have today. We're going to create a portfolio for each demand center, at least one portfolio for each demand center. We're going to ensure each portfolio has one intake system. That is to say, operating from a queue or a backlog, only one. We're going to force rank demand, as we always do with backlogs. And this last one's important. We're going to operate on good enough data. This issue of roughly right being much better than precisely wrong is really important at the portfolio level. So we're going to talk about some rubrics, some metrics for how we actually start to measure capacity in a way that's fast and efficient. Obviously, creating dedicated, persistent, high-performing teams is important. Decoupling supply from demand, as I said. We plan quarterly with a governance process that allows us to reallocate capacity flexibly and quickly. And the lowest unit of capacity, the most granular unit of capacity that we're moving is a team. Never people, just teams, because the teams are persistent and permanent. And then, believe it or not, on a finance conversation, I'm going to make the point that if you don't fund technical excellence and have good technical practices and craftsmanship at the team level, none of this works. Aggregating programs and portfolios on top of a weak foundation is a disaster. Don't scale before you reach maturity. The most important single concept I'm going to introduce in the portfolio section is the idea of return on teams. There are a few other prescriptions that I'll just zoom through if you want to read them. Yeah, portfolio is super simple. There's nothing to it. So I talked about roughly right. Team iterations ends up being a really good rough estimating heuristic, if you will. So if you take large initiatives at the portfolio level, or even epics, and you're saying this one's 14 team iterations, this one's 6 team iterations, you can sort of do t-shirt sizing at that level. And none of this has implications for story points. There's no commitment about the estimate downstream, but it gives us rough estimating so that we can start to set expectations with line of business sponsors where the cut lines are on those backlogs at any level. This idea of return on team is really powerful. From a finance perspective, it sounds a lot like return on assets. We're reinforcing the idea that a team is a persistent corporate asset that we're going to preserve, invest in, and demand yield from. Return on team, the numerator of this equation is obviously the cost per iteration. We know exactly what it costs us to crank 1 2-week iteration of a team. It's a simple math. The numerator can be represented by any particular benefit or value calculation that you use. You may or may not want to incorporate cost of delay into something like WSJF, or just something simpler, a derivative of some value assignment. Quickly, just in terms of structuring the capacity side for stability and measurement, I've got a couple little graphics. I promise that the PowerPoint art gets better as the presentation goes on. Some of these are pretty amateurish, but obviously, and Sally's the best at this, start with objectives and impacts, align on those objectives and impacts, understand what the business strategy is that you're serving. And of course, that's the point at which we create the funding allocations across different competing delivery pools and demand centers. So product 1 in this case has 35 teams allocated to it, which costs about $60 million a year. Product area 2 has 16 teams allocated to it, $24 million. We use roadmaps a lot when we do Agile portfolio. What we're really trying to do is, my favorite sort of definition of digital transformation, which is a hugely misused term, is that it's kind of like DevOps. With DevOps, we're breaking down the silo walls between development and production operations so it becomes one merged thing that collaborates, works together off of one backlog. Digital transformation, to me, is breaking down the wall between IT and the business. You know, we give business leaders huge discretion and hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars in investment discretion in, you know, OpEx and CapEx and facilities and trucks and airplanes and stores and infrastructure. But we treat investment in software as a completely different governance structure with different asset allocation mechanisms. It's foolish, especially now that every business depends on technology to succeed. So let's just make technology part of the business initiative roadmap like everything else. So that's where this merger of the roadmaps comes. We'd have product areas that might use story maps for releases, prioritization of features, starting to set expectations about which capabilities release when. These boil down into epics and product area backlogs, you know, and into aggregations of tens or dozens of teams that might be in value streams, release trains. To simplify things and get out of framework wars, we tend to just call them delivery groups. The delivery capacity is fixed by the number of teams that are funded. The base unit for planning is team iterations. Simple math. Here's another graphic that illustrates we've got, you know, a master product backlog breaking into 2 product area groups, delivery groups. These might be dozens or hundreds of people. To the extent that we can, the first step in assigning capacity to demand, matching capacity and demand, is to try to give our key business sponsors, the line of business heads, as much control over a captive capacity pool as we can. So these are kind of ring-fenced delivery organizations that they have as much control and discretion and accountability for as possible. This gets rid of a whole bunch of IT business liaisons and ambassadors and run-around people, and just puts that capacity right in the hands of the business. Huge accountability associated with that. Obviously, you know, we want feature teams more than component teams. Component teams can't deliver features. Feature teams can. Feature teams are product owners for component teams. Component teams can be a rational step as you're moving towards feature teams from the dreaded platform services group. A shared services group that people rely on that takes tickets and argues about SLAs is no use to anybody. I mean, sometimes, every now and then there's a situation where you really do have a good reason to do that. But usually, those are very locally optimized. They're usually incorrectly staffed and resourced. And they usually are, we're much better off moving towards feature teams that are wholly capable. The metrics being produced by these stable delivery teams are things like return on team, cycle time throughput, trend lines preferably rather than absolute numbers. All of these can be aggregated up to any level of larger aggregation of people, delivery teams. We review quarterly in the governance and matching process to evaluate historical return on team or return on delivery group, projected return on team, return on delivery group. We make the adjustments by giving more or less allocation to different demand centers. Teams always stay intact. The situation that inevitably you're thinking in the back of your mind, well, what about those situations where there really is a cross-cutting initiative where, you know, these captive delivery groups that are ring-fenced, you know, there's some initiative that comes in that's going to impact everybody? Yeah, that happens. So we need to have a steering and governance process that can actually steal, essentially, some of that captive capacity from these delivery groups when necessary. And so you've got a portfolio steering group that's coming together, making these decisions about, you know, how to move something into a backlog of one of these delivery groups. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to Agile portfolio management. And now we're moving on to a quick conversation about budgeting. some of the graphics got messed up on that, I guess. But my buddy Evan Airborne and the Business Agility Institute put together with Sally and SolutionsIQ's collaboration, the Business Agility Report. One of the really interesting things that came out of it is this edition. Business agility gets us increased revenue, faster turnaround, improved relationships with customers, greater transparency. Well, one of the best predictors of getting those benefits is whether you have agile funding models. So let's talk about agile funding models. Annual budgeting has three primary purposes: setting targets and goals, which can be for performance management or organizational goal setting; forecasting for things like cash management, investment capacity, as well as forecasting numbers to the street; and then asset allocation processes. The problem with typical corporate annual budgeting is it uses the same number for all three things. And it's really bad at all of those three things. Why would you use a screwdriver when you need a hammer? So beyond budgeting is this movement. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. We tend to talk about lean and agile budgeting because there's much more to it than just getting rid of annual budgeting. But let's talk a little bit about some of the problems with traditional budgeting. One of the biggest is this accordion effect of annual planning. I bet a bunch of you are starting to go into your budget planning right now, and you're just thrilled. So here we are, talking about a planning horizon of 16 months or something insane that we're doing, as if we could guess what the hell's going to be going on at the end of next year. And we're going to put all this precision and effort into this giant plan, and 2 or 3 months into the year, something's going to change, and the whole effort is going to be garbage, and we'll throw it away and start over. Inevitably, right? Isn't that how it usually works? So we've got this really long planning horizon at the beginning, but then at the end of the year, we haven't got a new plan, and we're down to a 2-month plan or something. That's all that's left of the pre-existing budget for this year, right? So this horrible accordion effect of either having too much horizon or not enough, right? Short shelf life, it's expensive, it's distracting, it's a huge batch, so it's just anti-lean anyway. And so so those are some of the problems with budgeting. Using the same number for a target and forecast is just prima facie insane, right? A goal, a target, should be ambitious and inspiring. It should stretch. A forecast ought to be accurate. We don't want stretch forecasts. We want accurate forecasts, right? So let's not use the same number for both of those things. Let's come up with different techniques for forecasting and target setting and goal setting. More problems. Performance evaluation, it's an absolute number, a budget number. It should be relative. Like if you're running a business and the cost of diesel triples and the economy tanks, should you hit the same numbers, or should you hit something relative that reflects the larger business conditions that you're operating within? I didn't get my budget because the price of diesel went up. That doesn't seem fair. I did a great job even though the price of diesel went up. And then in terms of asset allocation, all of us have been managers owning budgets who have done pathological things to game the system that reflect really poor asset allocation, right? I mean, who didn't blow a bunch of cash at the end of the fiscal year desperately trying to throw corporate assets away so that you could have the same budget next year? That's not a good system, is it? So let's separate the numbers that we use for goal setting, for forecasting. Let's come up with completely different processes with the right planning horizons, the right frequencies, the right granularities for target setting, forecasting, and resource allocation. So for targets, these should be ambitious, visionary goals. They should be relative, sort of balanced scorecards, trend line based. In forecasting, what we see, and this is often the first place when we're doing lean agile budgeting with our clients, this is usually where they start. They do forecasting first because you can do it divorced from the other two things, and better forecasting makes asset allocation much more effective and easy down the line. What we usually see is we're moving towards rolling window forecasting. For example, and you might even have two windows, decide for your business how quickly you can steer and react to market conditions. And that defines how far out your first rolling window should be. So you might have 6 quarters look ahead and update it every quarter. How often you update those 4 rolling windows is the other important question. It's specific to your business. If you're running a pharmaceutical company and you have R&D cycles that are 3 or 5 years, it's going to be different from running a little software company. Your high precision window might be 90 days, and you might update it every 2 weeks. Those are just examples. So this kind of forecasting is so much more accurate. And you should be able to impute confidence intervals on variation, and you should be able to track variation after the fact to see why you were wrong. So those are sort of the maturity of agile forecasting. On asset allocation, it's just simple. You should be able to fund a good idea anytime. It's that simple. Come up with a process where you can do that. And where the process of getting funding approved is lean enough that you're doing progressive analysis instead of huge batches of giant business cases. Does that make sense? Okay, so we talked about kind of the new behaviors that we're asking from finance. New policies, new approaches, new processes from finance in phase 1. Now we've inoculated them with agile goodness and love. Talk about love. They want to be agile. They see the benefit. So what does an agile finance organization look like when it itself becomes agile? Are you ready to reimagine your agile finance function? 79% of CFOs agree that traditional finance roles will be replaced by higher value strategic roles. It's a big shift coming, and CFOs know it. They just don't know what it looks like yet. It's all about leveraging data, leveraging automation, upskilling people in finance because machines are doing most of the work, the rote work, the dumb work they used to do, so they can be more strategic, more focused on customers and markets. Digital finance is coming. So this explains kind of the traditional flow of functions: plan, transact, account, control, comply, report, analyze, and advise. In a post-digital finance organization, all that stuff that's covered by the blue hash marks is going to be done by machines. That's really cool. We can take all of that people and money and apply them to higher value activities where they're really applying their brains to planning and strategy and becoming partners with the business closer to the marketplace and closer to the strategy where it's executed. So this is actually a really positive thing for people in finance. 44% of the work done in finance in terms of people is anticipated to be replaced by robots. Killer robots, no. So, these traditional activities of reporting and closing and order to cash and all of these things, these all can be automated completely. Continuous improvement data modeling, predictive analytics, looking for business insights, that's where the big brains of really smart financial analysts, FP&A folks, are going to be applying themselves. In this reimagined operating model, we start to create pods that are, cross-functional teams of people from finance and business with a real focus on improving performance who get aligned to the P&Ls. So these are like feature teams. Instead of having FP&A over here and compliance over here and audit over here, we're creating cross-functional teams that include all of this. These pods are going to work on organic and inorganic investment, improving cost of goods sold and SG&A performance, working capital effectiveness, a bunch of cool stuff. It's going to be a way more fun job than it used to be. What you're going to see here is that the dimensions on the left are all going to shrink to the dimensions on the right as automation takes over finance, and we reorganized around cross-functional teams that are close to the business, providing strategic value. Big impact on talent strategy, big reskilling challenge, and a tremendous challenge for organizations to start to view their data, the flow of data through their organizational systems and transactions, to automate that data analysis, put automated governance into those data streams, and view that data as strategic corporate assets that are driving the business. So your next steps, if you want to implement Agile Finance, digitize finance, digitize everything that has material financial flows through it, harness the power of that data, lead the enterprise through becoming a truly digital enterprise, and reimagine talent strategy for finance. Those are the first steps to move towards Agile Finance. Thank you.